Some battles are worth fighting even when you know they might cost you everything. Natalie Rivers had always believed that doing the right thing mattered more than climbing the corporate ladder, but she never imagined that belief would be tested so brutally on a cold Tuesday morning in Chicago. The glass elevator climbed toward the 51st floor of Hartwell Luxury Resorts headquarters, and Natalie watched the city spread below her like a glittering promise. At 29, she had spent 6 years working her way from a front desk clerk to operations director, sacrificing weekends, holidays, and countless personal moments to prove herself in an industry that often overlooked women who didn't come from money or connections. The manila envelope in her trembling hands felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Inside were payroll documents, timesheet records, and witness statements that painted a devastating picture of systematic exploitation. For nearly 2 years, housekeepers, kitchen staff, and maintenance workers across 8 Hartwell properties had been cheated out of wages, forced to work unpaid overtime, and denied basic labor protections. The numbers were staggering. Hundreds of workers, many of them immigrants and single parents, had collectively lost over $3 million in wages they had rightfully earned. Natalie had spent 3 sleepless weeks gathering this evidence, double-checking every figure, interviewing workers who were terrified of retaliation. She knew bringing this to the CEO was risky. Damien Hartwell had a reputation as brilliant but ruthless, a man who had transformed his family's modest hotel business into a luxury empire spanning 12 cities. He was known for his sharp mind, his intolerance for weakness, and his absolute control over every aspect of his company. But Natalie also knew that staying silent would make her complicit in the theft and abuse. These weren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. These were real people struggling to feed their children, pay rent, and survive. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, revealing the executive floor with its marble columns, original artwork, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. Everything here whispered wealth and power. Natalie's worn heels clicked against the polished floor as she walked toward the corner office. Beverly, Damien's executive assistant, looked up from her computer with kind eyes that had always made Natalie feel welcome. The older woman's smile faded when she saw Natalie's expression. "He's in a mood today, sweetheart," Beverly warned quietly. "Maybe come back this afternoon?" "This can't wait," Natalie replied, her voice steadier than she felt. Beverly sighed but nodded toward the imposing oak door. "Good luck." Natalie knocked twice and entered without waiting for permission. The office was massive, dominated by a desk that looked like it cost more than a car and windows that framed Chicago's skyline like a painting. Damien Hartwell stood with his back to her, phone pressed to his ear, his tall frame outlined by the bright morning sun. He was handsome in that calculated way powerful men often were, with perfectly styled dark blonde hair, sharp features, and a charcoal suit tailored to perfection. He held up one finger without turning around, a dismissive gesture that immediately irritated her. Natalie waited, refusing to sit in one of the guest chairs. She stood straight, clutching the envelope, watching the second hand on the antique clock tick away precious minutes. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he ended his call and turned to face her. His blue eyes were cold, assessing, the eyes of someone who calculated the value of everything and everyone. "Miss Rivers, I don't recall scheduling a meeting." His voice was clipped, businesslike. "This couldn't wait for a scheduled meeting, Mr. Hartwell." Natalie stepped forward and placed the envelope on his desk. "I've discovered something that requires your immediate attention. These documents show systematic wage theft across our properties in Detroit, Minneapolis, Atlanta, and 5 other cities. Housekeeping and service staff are being underpaid, forced to work off the clock, and denied overtime compensation. This has been happening for almost 2 years." Damien glanced at the envelope without touching it. "And you brought this to me because?" Natalie blinked, surprised by his dismissive tone. "Because it's illegal. Because it's wrong. These workers are being exploited, some of them working 70-hour weeks and barely making enough to survive. We're violating federal labor laws and destroying people's lives." We're operating within industry standards, Damien said coolly, moving to sit behind his desk. Labor cost management is standard practice in hospitality. That doesn't make it right, Natalie insisted, feeling heat rise in her chest. These are human beings, not line items in a budget report. Many of them have families depending on them. They trusted us to treat them fairly. Damien leaned back in his leather chair, studying her with an expression that might have been amusement. Miss Rivers, you've been with Hartwell Resorts for 6 years, correct? Yes. In that time, have you learned nothing about how business operates at this level? He spoke slowly, as if explaining something obvious to a child. Profit margins in luxury hospitality are razor thin. Labor represents our largest operational expense. If we pay every housekeeper and dishwasher premium wages and overtime, we lose our competitive advantage. We can't compete with chains that manage costs efficiently. Paying people what they've legally earned isn't premium wages, Natalie shot back, her voice rising despite her best efforts to stay calm. It's basic human decency. It's the law. Human decency doesn't pay shareholder dividends, Damien said, his voice hardening. I built this company from 3 properties my father left me. I turned it into a $2 billion enterprise through smart decisions and difficult choices that people like you, who've never carried that kind of responsibility, can't possibly understand. I understand right from wrong, Natalie said firmly. And I understand that if this information reaches the Department of Labor or the media, it will cost you far more than paying these workers what you owe them. You'll face lawsuits, criminal investigations, and your reputation will be destroyed. Damien stood slowly, his full height suddenly intimidating. He walked around the desk until he was standing directly in front of her, close enough that she could smell his expensive cologne. Are you threatening me, Miss Rivers? Natalie held her ground, though her heart hammered against her ribs. I'm trying to protect this company and do what's right. The right thing? Damien repeated softly, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Let me tell you what the right thing is. The right thing is remembering your place in this organization. The right thing is understanding that you're a mid-level manager who doesn't question executive decisions. The right thing is loyalty to the company that gave you opportunities. Loyalty goes both ways, Natalie said quietly. These workers have been loyal to you for years. Damien's jaw tightened. He walked back to his desk and pressed the intercom button. Beverly, contact Human Resources immediately. Have them prepare termination paperwork for Miss Natalie Rivers, effective today. Cause, insubordination and violation of confidentiality protocols. The words hit Natalie like a physical blow. She stared at him, searching his face for any sign of humanity, any indication that he was bluffing. But his expression remained cold, resolute, completely unmoved. You're firing me, she said slowly, for trying to protect your workers. For attempting to prevent your company from breaking the law. I'm firing you for overstepping your authority and demonstrating poor judgment, Damien corrected. You may think of yourself as some kind of crusader, but you're simply naive and impulsive. This isn't a charity, Miss Rivers. It's a business. Natalie gathered the envelope from his desk with shaking hands. I hope you can sleep at night knowing your fortune is built on people you refuse to treat with dignity. I sleep perfectly well, Damien replied, already turning back toward the window. Beverly will escort you to collect your belongings. Security will ensure you leave within the hour. And Miss Rivers, if you attempt to take this story to the press or regulators, our legal team will bury you in litigation for the next decade. Don't test me. Natalie walked out on legs that barely supported her weight. The elevator ride down felt endless. Beverly had quietly provided a cardboard box, and Natalie mechanically packed her desk, a small succulent plant, a photo of her grandmother, a coffee mug from her college graduation. Her colleagues watched in shocked silence as 2 security guards flanked her through the lobby. Outside, the November wind cut through her thin blazer. Natalie stood on the sidewalk, holding her box of belongings, trying to process what had just happened. 6 years of hard work, of proving herself, of believing that dedication and integrity mattered, all gone in 15 minutes because she had tried to do the right thing. Her phone buzzed with a text from her grandmother. "Did you remember to send money for my prescriptions?" The pharmacy called. Natalie felt tears sting her eyes. Her grandmother lived on a fixed income in a small apartment on the south side, managing heart disease and arthritis. Natalie supplemented her expenses every month, money that would now disappear along with her steady paycheck. Her own rent was due in 2 weeks. Her savings account would last maybe 3 months if she was extremely careful. She had just thrown away her financial security for workers who would never even know she had tried to help them. As Natalie walked toward the train station, she didn't look back at the gleaming Hartwell Tower reaching toward the sky, a monument to one man's empire and one woman's shattered career. 3 days of unemployment felt like 3 years. Natalie woke each morning to the crushing weight of uncertainty, staring at her laptop screen where job listings blurred together into meaningless words. Every application felt futile. The hospitality industry was small, and word traveled fast. Damien Hartwell's influence reached everywhere. She had been blacklisted without a single word being spoken. Her savings account balance mocked her from her phone screen. Rent was due in 11 days. Her grandmother had called twice asking about the prescription money. Natalie had lied, saying it was coming, then spent an hour crying in her tiny bathroom where the neighbors couldn't hear. It was Thursday evening, nearly 8 o'clock, when someone knocked on her apartment door. Not a polite tap, but an urgent, insistent pounding that made her heart race. She wasn't expecting anyone. Through the peephole, Natalie saw the last person she ever expected to see in her modest building. Damien Hartwell stood in the dim hallway, looking completely out of place in an expensive navy suit. But something was different. His hair was disheveled, his tie loosened, and he had dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. "Go away," Natalie called through the door. "Please, I need to speak with you. Just 5 minutes. You destroyed my career. You threatened me. Why would I give you 5 seconds?" There was a long pause. When Damien spoke again, his voice was different, softer, almost broken. "Because you were right about everything, and I desperately need your help." Against every instinct screaming at her to send him away, Natalie slowly unlocked the door but left the chain engaged. Through the gap, she could see him more clearly now. He looked exhausted, desperate even, nothing like the cold billionaire from 3 days ago. "What do you want?" she asked. "After you left, I couldn't stop thinking about what you said," Damien began, his words tumbling out quickly. "So I started investigating myself. I went through the records personally, stayed up for 2 nights reviewing every property, every payroll report, every timesheet." He ran a hand through his hair. "Natalie, it's worse than you showed me. Much worse." Natalie felt her stomach turn. "How much worse?" "The underpayments and violations go back 3 years, not 2. And it's not just housekeeping and kitchen staff. It's maintenance workers, some front desk teams, laundry services across all 12 properties." His voice cracked slightly. "My cousin Gregory, our chief financial officer, has been systematically skimming money from labor budgets and hiding it in offshore accounts. He's been stealing from the company and from our workers. I was so focused on expansion, on acquisitions and growth, that I never looked closely at operational details. I trusted the wrong person. So fire him and fix it," Natalie said coldly. "Why are you here?" "Because I need someone I can trust. Someone with integrity who can't be bought or intimidated. Someone who actually cares about doing what's right." Damien met her eyes through the gap. "I need you, Natalie. Not as operations director, as vice president of ethics and compliance, with full authority to investigate and reform every aspect of this company." Natalie laughed bitterly. "You fired me 3 days ago. Now you want to promote me? I was wrong. Completely, catastrophically wrong. I let my ego and my paranoia about being challenged blind me to the truth. He pulled an envelope from his jacket. This is a formal offer. Triple your previous salary, full benefits, equity in the company, and a seat on the executive board. I'll also make a public statement acknowledging you were wrongfully terminated and that you're returning to help reform the company. Why should I believe anything you say? Damien looked down at his polished shoes, then back at her. Because whether you take this offer or not, I'm going to fix this. I spent this morning with attorneys drafting a complete restitution plan for every worker who was underpaid. I filed reports with the Department of Labor myself. I'm going to make this right, even if it costs me everything. His voice grew quieter. But I can't do it properly without you. You know the operations better than anyone. You care about the people. You have the courage to stand up even when it costs you. Please, Natalie. Come back. She studied his face, searching for deception, for manipulation. But all she saw was genuine remorse and exhaustion. Still, trust didn't come easily after what he had put her through. I have conditions, she said finally. Anything. Complete autonomy. I answer to no one but you, and you don't override my decisions about ethics and compliance. Every investigation I open, every reform I implement happens without interference. Agreed. Gregory is fired immediately. No golden parachute, no quiet resignation. He's terminated and prosecuted if the evidence supports it. Already done. I fired him at 6 this morning. The evidence is overwhelming. He'll be facing criminal charges. And you issue a public apology, not just to me, but to every worker affected by these practices. With a commitment to transparency moving forward. Damien nodded. I'll do a press conference tomorrow if you want. Natalie was quiet for a long moment, her hand resting on the door chain. Every logical part of her brain screamed that this was a trap, that powerful men didn't change overnight, that she would be hurt again. But a small voice whispered that maybe, just maybe, this was real. That sometimes people did recognize their mistakes and genuinely wanted to make amends. One more condition, she said softly. Name it. You listen when I tell you something is wrong. Even if you don't want to hear it. Even if it's uncomfortable or inconvenient. You actually listen. Damien's expression softened. I promise. I should have listened the first time. I'll never make that mistake again. Natalie slowly unhooked the chain and opened the door fully. Damien stood there, looking vulnerable in a way she'd never imagined possible for someone so powerful. I'll come back, she said. But I'm watching you. One sign that this is a game, one hint that you're not serious about real change, and I'm gone. And I'll take everything I know public. Fair enough. Damien extended his hand. Thank you for giving me a second chance I don't deserve. Natalie shook his hand, feeling the warmth of his grip, the sincerity in his eyes. Don't make me regret this. I won't. I swear I won't. As Damien left her building, Natalie closed the door and leaned against it, her mind racing. She had no idea if she was making the smartest decision or the biggest mistake of her life. But she knew one thing with certainty: those workers deserved someone fighting for them. And if she had the chance to make a real difference, to turn a corrupt system into something better, she had to take it. The next morning, Natalie walked back into Hartwell headquarters, this time not as a fired employee but as Vice President of Ethics and Compliance. Beverly's face lit up when she saw her. Welcome back, honey. We missed you. Damien met her in the conference room with his entire legal team, human resources director, and financial auditors. He stood when she entered, a gesture of respect that didn't go unnoticed. Everyone, this is Natalie Rivers, our new VP of Ethics and Compliance. She has my full authority to investigate any aspect of our operations. You will provide her with complete cooperation and access to any records she requests. No exceptions, no delays. He turned to Natalie. Your office is ready. Where do you want to start? Natalie set her briefcase on the table, pulled out a thick binder, and looked around the room at the faces watching her with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. We start by contacting every single worker who was affected. We calculate exactly what they're owed, down to the penny, including interest. Then we pay them back, publicly apologize, and implement new oversight systems to ensure this never happens again. She met Damien's eyes. And we do it right, even if it's expensive and uncomfortable. Damien nodded. Whatever it takes. The next 3 weeks were a whirlwind. Natalie worked 18-hour days, reviewing records, interviewing workers, building cases. Damien was there beside her, learning the names and stories of people he had never noticed before. He attended meetings with housekeepers and kitchen staff, hearing firsthand how the wage theft had affected their lives. One afternoon, a woman named Rosa Martinez came to Natalie's office. She was in her 40s, with tired eyes and work-worn hands. She worked as a housekeeper at the Detroit property. I wanted to thank you, Rosa said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. For 3 years, I worked extra hours, came in early, stayed late. They never paid me right. I have 3 kids, and some months I couldn't afford food and rent. I thought about quitting, but I needed the job. Tears streamed down her face. You got me back $12,000. Do you know what that means? I can fix my car. I can buy my daughter the glasses she needs. I can breathe again. Natalie felt her own eyes fill with tears. This was why she had fought. Not for the title or the salary, but for moments like this. You deserved every penny of that money, Natalie said, taking Rosa's hands. I'm sorry it took so long. After Rosa left, Damien appeared in her doorway. He had witnessed the exchange. I never knew their names before, he said quietly. I never knew their stories. I just saw numbers on reports. He stepped into her office. You changed that. You changed me. Natalie looked at him, seeing something different in his eyes. Not the cold calculation of before, but genuine humanity, humility even. People aren't numbers, she said simply. I know that now. Thank you for teaching me. The press conference was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon, and Natalie could feel the tension crackling through Hartwell headquarters like electricity before a storm. Damien had spent the morning pacing, rehearsing his statement, asking her opinion on every word. She had never seen him nervous before. It was strangely humanizing. What if they don't believe me? He asked, standing by the window of his office, watching news vans assemble in the plaza below. What if they think this is just damage control? Then you prove them wrong through actions, not words, Natalie replied calmly. She was seated at the conference table, reviewing the final restitution numbers. You've already filed reports with labor authorities. You've already paid back $4.2 million to 378 workers. You fired your cousin and cooperated with prosecutors. The truth speaks for itself. Damien turned to face her. I couldn't have done any of this without you. You know that, right? You could have, Natalie said honestly. But you wouldn't have. There's a difference. He smiled slightly, a real smile that reached his eyes. You don't let me off easy, do you? That's why you hired me. The press conference room was packed with reporters, cameras, and workers who had been invited to attend. Natalie stood off to the side as Damien approached the podium, his expression serious but open. She had helped him write the statement, but insisted he deliver it in his own words. Authenticity couldn't be scripted. Thank you all for coming, Damien began, his voice steady despite the nerves she knew he was feeling. I'm here today to address serious labor violations that occurred across Hartwell Luxury Resorts properties over the past 3 years. I'm here to take full responsibility for those violations and to outline the steps we've taken to make things right." He paused, looking directly at the cameras. "For 3 years, hundreds of our employees, the people who make our hotels run, who serve our guests, who work incredibly hard every single day, were systematically underpaid. They were denied overtime compensation they had legally earned. They were exploited, and it happened under my leadership." Natalie watched the reporters scribbling notes, cameras flashing. Damien continued, his voice growing stronger. "I want to be clear about something. This wasn't just a policy failure or an accounting error. This was wrong. It was a violation of trust, a violation of basic human dignity, and a violation of the law. When our Vice President of Ethics and Compliance, Natalie Rivers, first brought these violations to my attention, I didn't listen. I dismissed her concerns, and I fired her for having the courage to stand up for what was right." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Damien glanced at Natalie, and she gave him an encouraging nod. "That was one of the worst decisions I've ever made as a leader. Natalie was right, and I was wrong. I let my ego and my focus on profit margins blind me to the human cost of our practices. I'm deeply sorry to her, and I'm deeply sorry to every worker who suffered because of my failure to lead with integrity." He outlined the restitution plan, the new oversight systems, the independent audits, the ethics hotline, and the commitment to transparency. Then he did something Natalie hadn't expected. He invited Rosa Martinez to the podium. Rosa was nervous, her hands shaking as she approached the microphone, but her voice was clear and strong. "My name is Rosa Martinez, and I worked as a housekeeper at the Detroit Hartwell Resort for 6 years. For 3 of those years, I was paid less than I earned. I worked 60, sometimes 70 hours a week, but my paychecks didn't reflect that time." She paused, gathering her courage. "I'm a single mother with 3 children. There were months when I had to choose between paying rent and buying groceries. I felt invisible, like my work didn't matter, like I didn't matter." Tears glistened in her eyes. "But then Miss Rivers fought for us. She risked her job, her career, to make sure we were treated fairly. And Mr. Hartwell, he listened. He made it right. I received $12,000 in back pay. That money changed my life. It gave me dignity back." The room was silent except for the click of cameras. Rosa looked directly at Damien. "Thank you for finally seeing us. Thank you for doing what's right." When the press conference ended, Natalie found herself surrounded by reporters asking questions. She answered them honestly, refusing to sugarcoat the severity of what had happened but also acknowledging the genuine reforms being implemented. As the crowd dispersed, a young reporter approached her. "Miss Rivers, you risked everything to expose this. What made you do it?" Natalie thought about that question. "Because silence makes you complicit. Because doing the right thing isn't always easy, but it's always necessary. Because those workers deserved someone in their corner, and I was in a position to be that person. Even though it cost you your job. Especially because it cost me my job. If I had stayed silent to protect my career, I wouldn't have been able to live with myself. Some things are more important than paychecks and job titles. Integrity is one of them." That evening, after the office had emptied and the news coverage had aired, Natalie stood in her new office, looking out at the Chicago skyline painted in sunset colors. She heard footsteps and turned to find Damien in the doorway. "You were incredible today," he said, entering the room. "The way you handled those reporters, the way you stood by the reforms even when they pressed you. I'm in awe of you, honestly." "I just told the truth," Natalie replied with a slight smile. "Novel concept, I know." Damien laughed, a genuine sound of amusement. "You know, a month ago, I would have said that honesty is overrated in business. That success requires calculated moves and strategic omissions. You've completely changed how I see everything." "Good," Natalie said simply. Because that version of you was building an empire on sand. This version, the one willing to admit mistakes and make real changes, this one can build something that actually lasts. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the city lights begin to twinkle as darkness fell. Damien moved closer to the window, standing beside her. "I've been thinking about something," he said quietly. "When you first confronted me, you said loyalty goes both ways. I didn't understand what you meant then. I thought loyalty meant blind obedience. But you taught me it means honesty, even when it's hard. It means caring about people, not just profits. It means being worthy of the trust people place in you." Natalie turned to look at him, seeing vulnerability in his expression. "You're learning. That's what matters. I want to keep learning. From you, from our employees, from anyone willing to teach me how to be better." He met her eyes. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness for how I treated you. But I hope, over time, I can earn your trust." "You're already earning it," Natalie said honestly. "Every day you show up willing to listen, willing to change, you earn a little more. That's how trust is built. Not in grand gestures, but in consistent, daily choices to do better." Damien smiled, and for the first time since she'd met him, it was a smile without calculation or guardedness. It was genuine warmth. "You're not just a good ethics officer, Natalie. You're a good person. The kind of person who makes everyone around them want to be better." "So are you," Natalie replied. "You just forgot for a while. But you're remembering." In the weeks that followed, Hartwell Luxury Resorts underwent a transformation. The ethics hotline received calls that led to more reforms. Worker satisfaction surveys were implemented. Wage structures were completely overhauled to ensure fairness and transparency. Natalie trained managers across all 12 properties on ethical leadership and labor compliance. But the change that mattered most was in Damien himself. He started visiting properties regularly, not just for inspections, but to talk with workers. He learned names, asked about families, listened to concerns. He instituted profit-sharing programs and created pathways for hourly workers to advance into management. He became the kind of leader who inspired loyalty through respect, not fear. One morning, 6 months after the press conference, Natalie walked into the office to find flowers on her desk. Not the expensive, showy kind that came from corporate florists, but a simple bouquet of wildflowers with a handwritten note. "Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for showing me what real leadership looks like. You changed my life and the lives of hundreds of people. I'm grateful every day that you were brave enough to stand up for what's right." It was signed simply, Damien. Natalie smiled, touching the delicate petals. She thought about that day 6 months ago when she had stood in his office with evidence of wrongdoing, terrified but determined. She thought about the moment he fired her, the despair that followed, the impossible choice she faced. And she thought about his unexpected return, his genuine transformation, the good that had come from refusing to stay silent. Standing up for what's right is never easy. It often costs more than we want to pay. But the alternative, staying silent while injustice continues, costs even more. It costs our integrity, our humanity, our ability to look at ourselves in the mirror and feel proud of who we are. Natalie had learned that true strength isn't found in power or wealth or titles. It's found in the courage to speak truth even when your voice shakes, to stand firm even when standing costs you everything, to believe that doing right matters more than doing well. She had also learned that people can change. Not everyone, and not easily, but sometimes, when confronted with truth and given the chance to choose differently, people surprise you. Damien had been arrogant, cruel even, but underneath that armor was someone capable of growth, of genuine remorse, of transformation. As she arranged the wildflowers in a vase, Natalie thought about Rosa and the hundreds of other workers whose lives had improved because one person refused to stay silent. She thought about the systems and safeguards now in place to protect future employees. She thought about the culture shift happening across the company, from exploitation to respect, from greed to integrity. The journey from that devastating firing to this moment had been terrifying and uncertain. But standing here now, in an office that represented not just a job but a mission, Natalie knew she would make the same choice again. Because some battles are worth fighting. Some truths are worth speaking. And some risks are worth taking. The right thing is rarely the easy thing. But it's always, always worth it. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, standing up for what's right doesn't just change policies or procedures. It changes hearts. It changes lives. It changes everything. Natalie touched the note one more time, then turned to her computer to continue the work. There were more reforms to implement, more workers to protect, more battles to fight. But now she wasn't fighting alone. She had an ally where she once had an adversary, a partner where she once had an opponent. And that, she thought, smiling as sunlight streamed through her window, was worth every terrifying moment of standing up to a billionaire CEO who didn't want to hear the truth. Because the truth had set them both free.